Hi there everyone and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman and I'm so happy to bring you another episode of Mixed Media, the Paper Wishes Way. This week we're going to combine gilding techniques with stamping, and this is a great way to create pattern and shine and use your stamps in a new way. We're going to play with the Golden Jewel Gilding Flakes kit from Creative Expressions, and this includes a pot of gold gilding flakes, a sponge, and a tube of specialty adhesive. Stamping with the adhesive, then applying the gilding flakes will create a beautiful vintage effect. So today we'll talk about how to do this technique, and I'll share a few tips and tricks for success. I'm really glad you're joining us for this fun series, so come play with us. Let's start with our first project. You can see my gilded flower and then also some gilded stamping here on the background. These are kind of random splat stamps. There's also a partially gilded pattern here in the center and also along the edge of the card. So I'm going to show you two twists on the stamping technique, and one is this simple stamping and gilding and the other is the partial gilding. So let's get our supplies sorted. I'm going to move aside the card. So for this card, I'm going to be using the beautiful Peony stamp set from Crafter's Companion. And this is where I'm going to get my flower as well as my big beautiful background stamp. Okay, so I've got my flower stamp mounted up onto an acrylic block. You can see here I've got my piece of wax paper that's taped down onto my craft sheet. And I'm just going to get a little bit of this adhesive and decant a bit of it onto my wax paper. Now remember, this adhesive is specially designed so it's not going to dry until I apply the gilding flakes to it. And I've cut the sponge in my kit in half, and if you joined us a couple weeks ago for our first gilding webisode, this is the same sponge, so I can reuse this over and over again. And when I'm done with it, I just put it into a little zippered bag, plastic bag, and then I can keep the same sponge, kind of designated as a glue sponge. Okay, so I'm just going to load up my sponge with some of this adhesive and apply it right onto my stamp. Now I want to make sure that I get enough coverage, but not so much that I'm flooding the stamp, and the sponge makes that pretty easy. Okay, I'll just grab a piece of plain white cardstock. This part I need to work pretty quickly to get that stamped on here, and then to lift so I don't tear my paper. And I know it's tricky to see because it's clear on white, but trust me, I've got my stamped flower on here. Now, I do need to make sure to clean my stamp pretty quickly, so when I'm filming or working on a big project, I just pop that off and put it into a bucket of water and let that adhesive come off. Okay, now I need to let the adhesive on here get tacky before I add the gilding flakes. And this is going to take a couple of minutes, so you can set this aside for a while. There's no rush to add the gilding flakes. And in fact, you can come back in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or even a couple of hours. So while this is setting up, let's take a look at our gilding flakes. With this kit, you get a 20 milliliter pot of hand-cut gilding flakes. They are absolutely gorgeous quality. Now, gilding flakes are really lightweight and they can fly around a bit, so do be sure before you open the jar that you've closed the windows, turned off the air conditioning, and any fans. And do try not to sneeze. It can really go everywhere. Now you're going to have some large pieces and also some smaller pieces in here too. And you can apply this with tweezers, which is what I like to do. You can also use your fingers. Just make sure that you've got any of that specialty glue cleaned off your hands before you do that. Okay, let's take a look at our stamped image and see if we're ready to gild. I think we might be ready, so let's give it a try. Now you'll notice I've got the other piece of my sponge on here. This is what I'm going to use to refine the image, and I've also got a piece of copier paper underneath here because I can use this copier paper to catch any of my excess gilding flake and just pop it back into the jar. Okay, so I'm going to kind of tap this onto my image. You can start with a little and then add more as you need. Remember that that glue is not going to dry until it's got gilding flakes stuck to it. Okay, so I'm just going to take this sponge and kind of start scooting that gilding flake around here. And you can see where the excess will come off, and I can easily just pop that back into the jar. Okay, so I'm just using a kind of a gentle circular scrubby motion. And take a look. What a beautiful image. So I've let the glue get a bit tacky for a couple of minutes, and that's really all it takes. So pretty and so easy to do. Okay, I'm going to move aside these elements here. Make sure I put the lid back on the jar. And let's take a closer look at my card project so you can see how easily this has come. And I just used a circular die to cut this, and then it's got a beautiful scalloped edge around the outside here too. So that's how I created this image here on the flower. And I love using this on darker paper too. You can see how beautifully this coordinates with the lacy coral paper pack. So I've got my splats on here, I've got my flower here. On the inside, I've got some gilding going around this piece, and you can see that it's kind of covering up the ends of the ribbon that I have going across the front of my card. Now, I love how it looks on this dark pattern paper, so I wanted to see how it would look on black cardstock. So take a look at the peony that I've stamped on here, and this is just plain black cardstock. Now, one thing that I discovered, this image is quite a bit larger than the first flower. So whereas this is about 1.5 inches, this one is 4.5 inches. So it's considerably bigger. Now, when I was working with large clear acrylic stamps like this one, I discovered that if I used my MISTI and first stamped the large image with regular stamping ink, then stamped over it with the specialty glue, I had a much better result than if I simply stamped with glue. Now I tried this with small rubber stamps, large rubber stamps, small clear stamps, large clear stamps, and I found that for some reason with large clear stamps, this was just a much more efficient and foolproof process. So just a little tip as I was working. So we're going to take a look at that process and see how easy that is to achieve a beautiful stamped and gilded image. Okay, so I've got a piece of black cardstock in my MISTI and my stamp on the other side, and this is that big beautiful flower stamp from the Heartfelt Wishes stamp set. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp it in stamping ink. And I'm using the Finesse from Spectrum Noir, and this is in Noir Black. Doesn't really matter what color it is. So I'm going to ink up my image just like I normally would. And then you guys know how the MISTI works. All you need to do is just close this up and stamp your image. Okay, now I know again it's one color on another color, so it's going to be a bit tricky to see. But you can trust me, it is on there. I think you can see it a little bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just quickly clean off the ink from my stamp. And then I can use my adhesive on here, my specialty adhesive. So I've got a bit of it on my sponge, on that same sponge that I've been using. And I'm just going to tap this on here. Again, you want to make sure that you're getting enough on there, but you're not flooding the image. So tap this on here, and then leaving everything in place, I'm going to close this again, press it firmly and quickly, and then pull that off. Now once again, I want to make sure to get this gluey stamp into some water, and then what I need to do is just remove this. I think you can see the shine of that where that adhesive has gone. Now, just as with our other example, we need to let this get tacky, and then we can add our gilding flake. Okay, now my flower has gotten tacky. There's no more of that sort of bluish cast to the adhesive on here, so I think we're ready to go and add our flake. Again, I've got my piece of copier paper under here and my gilding flake, and I'm just going to, once again, pull out some of this gilding flake. Oh, here's a nice big piece. And just kind of tap this on here. Now, what I can do is kind of spread it out. And you can, again, you can use your finger to do this. I find the tweezers give me a little bit more control. And then I'm going to grab my little sponge, and it's still got some gilding flake on it from before, which is fine. and just sort of move this around. Now you may be looking at this right now and thinking, oh, that's looking like quite a mess. But don't worry, once you start refining the image, it will look really nice. So again, just using a bit of a circular motion on there and moving that gilding flake around until I've got all of the area covered. And just take a look, a really pretty, beautiful image. Now what I also like to do, if you have a big fluffy brush, it's really nice to sort of fluff away any of those stray bits of gilding flake on here, and you'll get a really nice polished image. But I think this is absolutely beautiful and so striking, a really pretty vintage effect. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. Once again, put the lid back on that jar. And I'm going to kind of move everything over to one side. And let's take another look at that original card. And we can see here that I've trimmed off some of it. I have edged around the outside of this black piece of cardstock. And we talked about that in our first gilding video. Again, I've got some of those beautiful lacy coral papers on here. On the card inside, I've got a panel up here of pattern paper. Again, hiding some of the ends of the twine that's been wrapped around here. And I've got another nice stamped sentiment in here. This is from the same stamp set. So it's a great way to get a really beautiful, bold vintage effect. And of course, it works really nicely with some dazzles. Okay, so now that we know how to do our basic stamping and gilding, let's look at how to create a partially gilded look. And I'm going to bring back in this first card that we looked at, because remember, we've got a partially gilded image here. We also have a partially gilded image going along the side here with some beautiful script stamp. And by partially gilded, I mean that you can see both the black stamping ink on here as well as some gilding in some areas. And in fact, you can also see it here on this card with this floral focal image, which has been stamped in black and then partially gilded, as well as the background on here. So let's take a look at this process. I've got a piece of white cardstock here in my MISTI, and I first colored a portion of it with the Harbor Haze matte chalk polish. And I just love that beautiful kind of dusty blue color. It looks really pretty with the pattern papers. On the other side, I've got my big, beautiful flower image, and I'm just going to grab once again that same Noir Black ink pad and ink up my stamp, just like I normally would. So make sure I've got this covered on here. It's a really nice, big, beautiful flower. So ink this up with the black, and then close up my MISTI, and make sure to press this down really well. If I don't get it completely, of course, what I can do is go back and do it again. It looks like I've got a little bit of a bald spot here. So I'll just ink it up again. This is the beauty of the stamp positioner. And a tool that I've found that I kind of can't stamp without anymore. As a longtime stamper, that says quite a lot. Okay, so make sure that I get that area pressed down. Okay, so now I've got my image stamped. And what I'm going to do is, once again, just kind of clean off that black ink from my stamp. And then what I'm going to do is keep everything in place. So the stamp is in place, my stamped piece is in place. And now what I can do is go back to my inky, or my gluey piece of sponge, and I'm going to ink it up or glue it up just in portions of this area. So I can kind of pick and choose where I want that gilding to go by where I put the adhesive on my stamp. So I may choose to have it kind of go around the outside edges of my floral image, but I'm going for a distressed look, so I don't want it all over everywhere. And if I find like, ooh, yeah, I'm not quite sure if I want it to be over there, just come back in and kind of tap off a little bit with a baby wipe. So maybe I decide that I want it more on the leaves, going along the edge, on the stem, and then the same process as before. You're just going to press this down. You need to lift it off quite quickly, And then once again, make sure you clean off your stamp really thoroughly. I'm going to pull this one off and put it in my bucket of water over here. And then once again, we just need to let this set up and get tacky, and we can add our gilding flakes. I'm going to add my gilding flakes as I did before, and it didn't take as long for my glue to get tacky and ready to go as with larger images where we had more adhesive. And in fact, this one was quite quick and ready to gild. So again, I'm just going to use that scrubbing tool and kind of move the gilding flakes onto my image. And you'll notice with this partial gilding effect that I'm going to have still some of that black showing, but then also just some areas are going to have that gilding. Now I'm using the same sponge throughout. You don't have to clean your sponge unless probably you're switching colors of gilding flakes. So I just keep this one the way it is. Keep it in a separate little Ziploc baggie, and you can use it again and again. Okay, I'm going to tap off some of the excess, and you can see how I've got a really pretty kind of vintage distressed effect on this flower. So simple to do and so lovely as well. Okay, I'm going to get the lid back on my jar here, and then let's take another look at this card again so you can see that big beautiful blossom on here. I've got some more partial gilding with a big beautiful background stamp going along the sides here. And I've also edged around the outside of my card with some gilding as well, as we've seen in previous webisodes. Now I've edged around the outside of this piece of cardstock with that Harbor Haze as well. So it does really tie in nicely with those pattern papers. On the inside of the card, I've covered this front panel with that beautiful pattern paper. I just couldn't get enough of it. And then I've got a piece of stamped imagery here, and then some of those splats overlapping on here. So I'm mixing and matching between those two Crafter's Companion stamp sets. They work together beautifully. So with today's webisode, we've really expanded on our gilding techniques and discovered a new way to put our stamps to use. And I really hope that you have enjoyed today's webisode. Thank you so much for joining me today, and really thank you for being a part of the Paper Wishes family. We're so very glad that you're here with us. I can't wait to see what you create as you explore mixed media the Paper Wishes way. Do be sure to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately, and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.